All right, y'all, here it is 2 weeks later with the Laowa 9mm on the Sony A7 IV for real estate video in particular. I'll take the lens cap off because if you did not see my last video about polarizers, you should definitely check it out. Here it is, a little polarizer on this one as well. Don't leave home without it for real estate stuff. That being said, let's talk about this lens. There were a few things I was pleasantly surprised by, and one thing that I do kind of consider a negative that I'll touch on at the very end, but I only encountered this situation once, so it's not a deal breaker at all. Number one, if you have seen other reviews with this lens, then you know it is sharp, and I am here to reaffirm that. It is tack sharp. Even down on f2.8, which is what I did the majority of my shooting on, when you put this thing on infinity, everything is tack sharp except for stuff just a little bit in front of the lens. It works really, really well, and I was pleasantly surprised at how well this worked. If you've seen any of my last videos, you know I talk about liking the Micro Four Thirds system because just the nature of it, more things are in focus at shallower fields, so I was a little worried about that. Luckily, it had absolutely no effect. Like I said, 2.8 shooting all the time, no problem at all. I really like about the lens is how small it is. It is super, super small and light, so it can fit in any rig with no problem. Now, the only downside to having this so small is that when I was trying to mount my A7 IV on my gimbal, I literally had to push it all the way up to its most extreme length to be able to balance it properly. So that was the only issue with having such a small lens on a larger or heavier camera rig system. Just something to keep in mind. That being said, let's talk about the one downfall I encountered with this lens. That is blooming. So I only really encountered this twice, and it was in spaces that were really, really dark with basically exposed bulbs. Here are a few clips of that stuff so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. But the blooming was pretty extreme on those, and that I was not expecting. But once again, this is only something I could replicate in dark areas. Yes, that kitchen was very dark. So it was only in dark areas and only places that had really like exposed bulbs, for lack of a better sense. Remember, like, subscribe, all that jazz. Keep rocking and rolling. Use my affiliate links. Doesn't cost you anything, but I get to take a little money from Bezos himself. It feels good. Other than the blooming factor, there was really not a single other negative I can tell you about using this lens. Now, I can tell you some negatives about using this lens with the A7 IV in particular that are not necessarily the fault of this lens. That is simply the A7 IV. I don't care what anyone else is telling you out there. It is not necessarily a banger when it comes to low light performance. The colors are incredible, but in comparison to my GH5S, it actually handles low light situations better with less noise. Now, this is only my personal theory, but I do think this goes back to the fact that the A7 IV is considered a hybrid camera for photos and video. Technically, these cameras with larger pixel count meant for photos have a smaller grain pattern that's much easier to notice in videos, and things that are built specifically for video in mind, like the GH5S or the FX3 or the A7S3, any of those cameras typically have a lower megapixel count, so you can't notice that fine grain near as much. I don't know if that's 100% accurate. That's just something that I've noticed over time in my particular theory. So I am actually using the A7 IV with this full time and no longer using the GH5S. There are some times where I am going through my footage and it is very grainy, especially in blacks on fireplaces. I've noticed it on kitchen fridges and really dark cabinets that I never had to overcome with the GH5S, but it's easier to overcome the noise issues with the A7 IV than it is to overcome the color issues with the GH5S 8-bit profile. Those are the two issues I really seem to be encountering while using this with the A7 IV in particular. Now, I have started just drastically increasing the amount of denoising I'm going. I used to denoise the GH5S and DaVinci Resolve on like somewhere below 20 is where all of my markers set. Now with the A7 IV, it's somewhere around 50. So it's much more sharpening and denoising in the post-production process. But ever since I started using that JJC white filter to catch balance before I start shooting, I don't ever have to touch colors. It's very, very easy to grade, and I'm gonna say this is a definite win for how cheap this lens actually was. I mentioned I got it on MVP. I think it was like 350 bucks, maybe a little bit less used, and it's pristine. The only thing it's missing is the lens hood. Anybody selling a lens hood for one of these by any chance? I looked on Laowa's site and it's like 60 bucks plus shipping to have just the lens hood shipped to me. So I'm like, I'm good with that. That is the lowdown and dirty for the Laowa 9mm with the A7 IV. And if you're interested in another tip, remember that polarizer I talked about earlier? Go check out my other video on polarizers where I give you 7 reasons why they are basically critical for real estate photo and videos. As always, keep rocking and rolling, enjoy what you're doing, make smart business decisions, and let me know how you're overcoming the noise issues with your A7 IV in these low light situations for real estate. I will catch you next time.